He gave his last meal to a stranger, then saw the boy years later in a suit. He stared at the coins in his hand, wondering how long they would last him, and already knowing the answer wasn't long at all. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. The day had been long, like most of his days, and the young man was already tired, though the sun hadn't completely disappeared. He had worked the morning shift at the construction site, then picked up a few hours at the small convenience store that allowed him to stack shelves for just enough money to cover rent. What he earned could never stretch far enough, and meals were often the first thing to suffer. A half loaf of bread, a few eggs, maybe a packet of instant noodles if he was lucky. That was the reality of his diet. He had just one sandwich left in a crumpled paper bag that he held close to his chest as he sat down on the park bench. 2 slices of bread, a thin smear of peanut butter, and nothing more. It wasn't much, but tonight, it was supposed to be everything. His stomach growled, and he tried to ignore it as he slowly unwrapped the bread. Each bite mattered, because once it was gone, there was nothing else waiting for him back at his apartment. The streets were quieter than usual. A few people passed by, bundled up in jackets against the chilly evening air. He barely noticed them. His eyes stayed fixed on the sandwich, as though savoring the moment before he took the first bite. He wanted to make it last. That's when he felt the gaze. He didn't know how long it had been there, but when he looked up, he saw a boy standing just a few feet away. The boy was thin, with messy hair and wide eyes that darted between the sandwich and the ground. His clothes looked worn, the kind that had been through more than one owner. He didn't speak. He didn't even step closer. He just stood there, watching quietly. The young man's chest tightened. He looked at the boy, then back at his sandwich. This was his last meal of the day. Giving it away meant going hungry until tomorrow, maybe longer. He had already counted the coins in his pocket. Barely enough to buy a bus ticket to work. Definitely not enough to buy another meal. He tried to take a bite, but the boy's eyes stopped him. He could see the hunger there, a hunger he knew well. The kind of hunger that sat like a heavy stone in your belly and made sleep impossible. He felt the familiar ache of it, not in his stomach, but in his heart. His mind argued with itself. One voice told him to keep the sandwich. He needed it. He had earned it after hours of lifting bricks and stacking shelves. Another voice whispered that maybe this boy needed it more, that maybe tonight kindness mattered more than survival. Finally, with a slow breath, he broke the sandwich in half. He could keep some for himself, at least. But as soon as he saw the boy's hesitant step forward, something inside him shifted. Instead of half, he held out the entire sandwich. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "Here," he said. "Take it." The boy's eyes widened. For a moment, he looked like he might refuse, as if he couldn't believe someone would give him food so freely. But then his small hands reached out, clutching the sandwich carefully as though it might disappear. "Thank you," the boy whispered, almost too soft to hear. He gave a quick, shy smile before hurrying off, clutching the sandwich to his chest, the same way the young man had done only moments before. The young man sat back on the bench, his hands empty now. His stomach growled louder, but he ignored it. A strange warmth spread through him, stronger than hunger. He had nothing left for himself, yet he didn't regret the choice. Something about the boy's grateful eyes made the emptiness easier to bear. He didn't know it then, but that simple choice would come back to him years later in a way he could never have imagined. The night had been colder than usual, and when he woke up the next morning, the young man could still feel the chill in his bones. His stomach ached from emptiness, but he forced himself out of bed anyway. Hunger was nothing new to him. It had become such a constant companion that he had learned to push it aside, treating it like background noise that never fully went away. He thought briefly of the boy from the night before, the way those small hands had clutched the sandwich, the way those eyes had lit up like he had just been handed treasure. The memory gave him a quiet sense of comfort, though it didn't fill his stomach. Still, he told himself it had been worth it. The day started the same way most of his days did. He tied his worn shoes, grabbed his jacket with the fraying sleeves, and set out for work. The construction site was noisy and unforgiving. Dust filled the air, and the foreman barked orders without pause. He worked with aching muscles, lifting, hauling, climbing. Every motion reminded him of the hunger gnawing at him, but he stayed silent. Complaints didn't change the fact that he needed the money. At lunchtime, the other workers sat together in groups, tearing into foil-wrapped meals and steaming thermoses. The smell of warm food hung in the air. He sat off to the side, pretending to be busy with a toolbox. He didn't want anyone to notice that he had nothing to eat. He had gotten good at hiding it, good at pretending he wasn't hungry when he was. The boy crossed his mind again. Was he eating now? Did the sandwich last him the night? He wondered if the boy had a family somewhere, or if he had to figure out survival on his own. The young man shook his head, trying to clear the thought. He had his own problems to deal with. When his shift ended, he walked back through the same park where he had seen the boy. He didn't expect to see him again, but his eyes still scanned the benches and pathways. For some reason, he wanted to know if the boy was okay. The park was nearly empty, though, and the boy was nowhere in sight. He sat down on the same bench, more out of habit than hope. The evening sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange. People walked their dogs, joggers passed by with headphones in their ears, and families strolled along the paths. It felt like the world kept moving forward, while he remained stuck in the same place. The paper bag that had once held his sandwich still lay crumpled beside the bench. He picked it up and smoothed it out with his hands, staring at the wrinkles. Funny how something so small could hold the weight of such a decision. He had given up his last meal, and though his stomach complained, he didn't regret it. As he sat there, a small sound broke his thoughts. Laughter, high-pitched and fleeting. He turned his head quickly, hoping to see the boy again, but it wasn't him. Just another child, running after a ball, his parents close behind. The young man sighed and leaned back. Maybe it was better that way. The boy had probably gone home, wherever that was. Maybe the sandwich had been a small relief in a string of harder days. He realized then that he didn't need to see the boy again. What mattered was the choice he had made. For once, he hadn't just thought about survival. He had thought about someone else first. In a life that felt like it was always taking from him, giving something away, no matter how small, had made him feel human again. He rose from the bench when the air grew colder, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. Tomorrow would be another long day of work, another day of hunger, another day of pushing forward. He didn't know what the future held, but he carried with him the faint memory of gratitude in a boy's eyes. What he didn't know was that this encounter, this quiet act of kindness in the middle of his own struggle, was only the beginning of a story that would return to him years later in a way he couldn't yet imagine. For now, it was just a memory, but one that mattered more than he realized. He sat on the edge of his bed later that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, unable to shake the memory of the boy's face. The hunger gnawed at him more sharply than usual, but the thought of those wide eyes filled with relief gave him something else to hold on to. Still, his stomach ached in protest, and he couldn't ignore the truth. He had given away the only meal he had. Morning came with little rest. His alarm buzzed faintly, though he had already been awake for hours, tossing and turning with an empty belly. He dragged himself up, his legs heavy and his head light. A few sips of water were all he had to quiet the gnawing inside. The walk to work seemed longer than usual, every step reminding him of what he had given up. At the construction site, he tried to bury himself in work, lifting bricks, mixing cement, hauling heavy beams across uneven ground. His arms ached, but what hurt most was the dizziness that clouded his vision whenever he bent down. His co-workers didn't notice. He had learned how to mask his weakness well. He forced smiles and quiet nods when spoken to, making sure no one guessed how little strength he really had left. By midday, when everyone else unwrapped their lunches, he walked off to the far side of the site. He sat alone, pretending to check his phone, though the screen was dark. His stomach twisted and cramped, the smell of other people's food filling the air around him. He thought of the sandwich again, the way the boy had clutched it like it was the most valuable thing in the world. That image gave him a strange kind of strength. But by evening, as the sun dipped low, his body started to argue against the kindness he had chosen. His hands trembled, his legs felt unsteady, and even the simple walk home seemed too much. He passed through the park once more, sitting down heavily on the same bench. The spot had become a place of reflection for him, though he hadn't planned it that way. It was here that his thoughts battled hardest. One voice inside him shouted in anger, "Why did you give away your food? You need it. No one is coming to save you." The other voice was softer, but persistent. He needed it more. You'll survive. You always do. The argument left him weary. He leaned forward, pressing his elbows against his knees, running his hands over his face. The world felt unfair. It always demanded sacrifices from him, and yet he kept giving. Was kindness worth the price of his own suffering? He didn't know the answer, not fully. As he sat there, he noticed movement on the other side of the park. A group of children played tag, their laughter cutting through the evening air. He watched them run, carefree and full of energy, and wondered what kind of life the boy he had helped was returning to. Did he have a family waiting for him? Or was he wandering alone? He would never know, but the question lingered like a shadow. He told himself that even if the boy had nothing else, at least that night, he had not gone to bed hungry. That thought mattered more than the ache in his own belly. The choice hadn't been easy. It never would be. But kindness rarely came without cost. Sitting there, clutching his jacket tighter against the cold, he realized something important. Sometimes doing the right thing meant hurting yourself a little. And though the emptiness in his stomach screamed for food, the warmth in his chest told him he had done the right thing. He didn't know it yet, but this hard choice, made on a simple park bench with a sandwich in his hand, was the turning point of a story that would follow him for years. For now, though, all he had was the hunger, the memory of the boy's grateful eyes, and the unshakable hope that it had been worth it. The boy's voice had been soft, almost a whisper, but the young man replayed it in his head all night. That simple thank you echoed louder than the growl of his stomach, louder than the worries that normally consumed him. He could still see the boy's small hands wrapped tightly around the sandwich, as though afraid someone might take it away. When he finally drifted into sleep, it was restless. Hunger kept waking him, twisting his insides. But in between those restless moments, he dreamed. He dreamed of the boy smiling, eating the sandwich quickly, crumbs on his face. In the dream, the boy wasn't cold or hungry anymore. For once, in his imagination at least, someone had enough. The morning came harsh and gray. He forced himself up, dressing quickly and heading out before his landlord could catch him in the hallway. He was late on rent again, and the last thing he wanted was another reminder of how little he had. The streets bustled with people heading to their jobs, carrying cups of coffee and paper bags filled with breakfast. The smell of fresh bread and roasted beans filled the air, making his hunger roar back to life. At the construction site, his body dragged. The foreman shouted at him twice before the day was even halfway through. He wasn't lifting as fast, wasn't moving as quickly. The lack of food had taken its toll, but he refused to complain. He had learned long ago that sympathy was rare in places like this. Complaining wouldn't bring him a meal. It would only make him look weaker. When the lunch whistle blew, he stepped aside, as usual. He sat on a pile of unused boards, pulling out his water bottle. The other men joked and laughed nearby, passing food between them, swapping bites of sandwiches and pieces of fruit. He turned away, staring at the ground, sipping water to trick his stomach into thinking it was full. For a moment, he wondered if the boy was doing the same thing somewhere else. Or if, thanks to the sandwich, the boy's hunger had been quieted for a night. That thought gave him enough strength to stand back up when the whistle sounded again, signaling the end of the break. The evening air was cooler when he walked home. His route took him past the park again. His eyes scanned the area instinctively, searching for a familiar small figure. He didn't see him. Just joggers, dog walkers, and couples strolling hand in hand. The boy was gone. He sat down on the same bench anyway. The spot had become a place of reflection without him realizing it. He leaned back, listening to the hum of the city. A part of him felt foolish for expecting the boy to return. He told himself that their paths had crossed once, and that was enough. He had helped in the moment that mattered. That was all that counted. Still, he couldn't deny the lingering ache inside him. Not just from hunger, but from something deeper. A longing he didn't often admit to himself. He wanted connection. He wanted to matter to someone. That single thank you from a stranger's child had meant more to him than he could explain. As the streetlights flickered on, he pushed himself up from the bench. He had work in the morning, and exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. But as he walked away, he carried with him that memory. A small act of kindness, a fleeting moment of gratitude, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, it had made a difference. He didn't realize it then, but that boy's shy smile and whispered thanks would stay with him for years. It would become a story he'd return to on the hardest nights, a reminder that even when he had nothing, he had given something. And someday, when life circled back, he would discover that the boy hadn't forgotten either. Years slipped by quietly, each one blending into the next as the young man tried to carve out a place for himself in the world. The boy with the sandwich became a memory tucked into the back of his mind, something he thought about on lonely nights but never spoke aloud. Life was too busy, too demanding, to dwell on what had already passed. He bounced from one job to another. Some lasted a few months, others just a few weeks. There were nights when he walked home with enough money in his pocket to feel hopeful, and other nights when he wondered if he would have to skip rent and risk another warning taped to his door. His shoes wore down faster than he could replace them. His jackets grew thin as winters came and went. Through it all, he kept working, always pushing forward because what else could he do? The hunger that had once haunted him eased over time. He found steadier work at a warehouse, hauling boxes and loading trucks. The pay wasn't much, but it was reliable, and it allowed him at least one proper meal a day. Still, no matter how hard he tried, it seemed like stability always danced just out of reach. Whenever he thought he was getting ahead, something knocked him back. A broken-down car, an unexpected medical bill, hours cut from the schedule. But there was one thing he carried with him, unshaken. That night on the park bench, that choice. On the hardest days, when he felt like giving up, he would remember the boy's eyes. Hungry, yes, but also grateful. And he would remind himself, even when you have nothing, you can still give. That thought gave him strength when everything else seemed to fail. His life settled into a rhythm. Wake up early, work until his muscles ached, come home, heat up something simple, and collapse into bed. Friends drifted away over time, moving on to marriages, careers, and families of their own. He stayed where he was, surviving but never quite thriving. Still, he found ways to endure. A cheap radio filled his apartment with music. Books from the library became small escapes. And every now and then, when he passed the park, he would glance at the bench where it had all happened, half expecting to see the boy again, even though he knew he wouldn't. Years later, he was older, his hair a little thinner, his face lined from years of strain. He still worked hard, still counted every dollar, still dreamed of a day when he wouldn't have to worry about rent or bills. But somewhere deep inside, he felt a quiet pride. He had made it this far. He had survived. What he didn't realize was that the world had not forgotten him. That small act of kindness, that simple choice to give away his last meal, had set something into motion. Life had a way of circling back, of bringing people together when the time was right. For now, though, he kept walking, head down, hands in his pockets, trying to push through another long day. He had no idea that his path was about to cross with a face from his past, a face he thought he'd never see again. And when it did, everything he believed about his struggles, his choices, and the value of kindness would be tested in ways he could never have predicted. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day he had lived through 100 times before. He had finished his shift at the warehouse, his back sore and his hands rough from hours of heavy lifting. The city hummed around him as he walked toward the bus stop, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. He was tired, as always, but not just in his body. The weight he carried went deeper, pressing on him in ways no one could see. The bus was late, so he sat on the bench nearby, staring blankly at the traffic. People in suits hurried past, phones in hand, briefcases swinging. He always felt out of place in moments like these. His clothes smelled faintly of sweat and dust from the warehouse, his shoes scuffed, his jacket patched in more than one spot. To everyone else, he was invisible, just another worker trying to make it through the day. That's when he noticed the commotion across the street. A large building stood there, gleaming glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun. People were filing out of it, dressed sharply, talking in quick voices. Some laughed, others looked serious, but they all had the same air of purpose about them. He could tell by the way they carried themselves that they belonged to a different world than his. And then he saw him. A man stepped through the glass doors, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored to fit him perfectly. His shoes shined, his tie neatly knotted, his hair was combed back with care, and his expression carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew where he was going. He looked like every successful professional the young man had ever imagined himself becoming, but never did. For a moment, he thought he was mistaken. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. But the face was unmistakable. The man in the suit was older now, taller, stronger, his features sharpened by time. But beneath all that, the young man recognized him instantly. It was the boy from the park. His heart skipped. He felt a rush of confusion, disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. The last time he had seen that face, it had been smaller, thinner, framed by messy hair and eyes that pleaded silently for food. Now, those same eyes shone with confidence. This was no longer the hungry boy clutching a sandwich in the dark. This was someone transformed. The man in the suit paused on the steps, shaking hands with a group of colleagues before they went their separate ways. Then, almost as if sensing a gaze, he turned. His eyes swept the street, landing on the weary worker sitting at the bus stop. Their eyes met. The young man felt his breath catch in his throat. He half expected the suited man to look away, to brush past him like everyone else. But instead, the man's eyes widened slightly. Recognition flickered across his face. The world seemed to pause. Cars honked, people moved, conversations buzzed, but in that moment, it was just the two of them. Years collapsed in an instant, and the memory of a sandwich passed from one hand to another came rushing back. The young man didn't know what to do. Should he wave? Should he pretend not to notice? His hands tightened on the strap of his worn-out bag, his body frozen in place. He felt exposed, like all his struggles, all his failures, were suddenly visible under the glare of the man's polished success. And then, to his surprise, the man in the suit began walking toward him, step by step, closing the distance. Each movement carried a certainty, a purpose. The young man's heart pounded. He had no idea what to expect. All he knew was that the boy he had once fed was no longer a boy, and whatever was about to happen would change everything. The man in the suit walked with steady strides, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he crossed the street. The young man, though not so young anymore, sat frozen on the bus stop bench, his heart hammering as if it wanted to break free from his chest. He felt out of place, too small for the moment that was unfolding in front of him. When the suited man reached him, he stopped, standing there for a long second as if taking him in. His eyes softened, and then, to the worker's shock, a smile spread across his face. "It's you," the man said quietly, his voice deep now, no longer the timid whisper of a hungry boy. The worker blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The suited man leaned forward slightly. "You gave me a sandwich once. Do you remember?" The worker felt a lump form in his throat. Of course he remembered. How could he forget? He nodded slowly, unable to speak just yet. A look of gratitude passed over the man's face, clear and unshaken even after all the years. "I never forgot you," he said. "That night changed me." The worker's mind spun. He had never expected to see the boy again, let alone like this, confident, successful, standing before him in clothes that cost more than a month of his rent. He had always wondered what became of that child, but the truth standing in front of him seemed almost unreal. "I was just a kid," the suited man continued, his voice steadier now. "I was scared. I was hungry. And you didn't know me, but you gave me the only food you had. I'll never forget how that felt." The worker swallowed hard, his voice finally breaking free. "I didn't think you'd even remember me." "How could I not?" the man replied. "You gave me hope when I thought no one cared." The words landed heavily, stirring something deep inside. For years, the worker had carried that memory quietly, clinging to it as proof that he had once made a difference, even in the smallest way. And now here it was, alive, spoken back to him in the voice of the boy who had grown into a man. He looked at the suit, the polished shoes, the watch gleaming on the man's wrist. "You've done well for yourself," he said softly, almost in disbelief. The man nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've worked hard, yes. But I also carried your kindness with me. Every step forward, I remembered that night. I told myself that if a stranger could care enough to give when he had nothing, then maybe I could build a life worth something." The worker felt his eyes sting, but he blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall in the middle of the busy street. He didn't know what to say. He had never thought his small act would matter beyond that moment. And yet here was the proof. It had mattered more than he ever imagined. For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence filled with the weight of everything unspoken. Two lives, once connected by a single sandwich, now meeting again after years apart. The man in the suit finally extended his hand. "It's good to see you again." The worker hesitated, then reached out. Their hands clasped firmly, and in that grip was a bridge across the years. The boy he once helped had not only remembered, he had returned, carrying gratitude that time hadn't dimmed. And as their hands lingered in that shake, the worker realized something he had never truly believed before. No act of kindness was ever wasted. The handshake lingered, firm and steady, and then the man in the suit sat down beside him on the bench. For a moment, it felt surreal. Two worlds colliding, the polished confidence of success sitting shoulder to shoulder with the worn exhaustion of survival. The worker shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of his frayed jacket, his rough hands, the dirt still under his nails from a long day at the warehouse. But the man beside him didn't seem to notice. His eyes were kind, focused, as though none of those details mattered. "You don't know what that night did for me," the man said quietly. "I was lost. My family was falling apart. We had nothing, and I was just a hungry kid wandering around, trying to hide how bad things were. When you handed me that sandwich, you didn't just feed me. You reminded me that people could still care, that I mattered." The worker swallowed hard, his throat tight. "It was just a sandwich," he said. The man shook his head firmly. "No, it was more than that. It was hope. And it was exactly what I needed." He paused, his voice softer now. "That moment stayed with me. It gave me the push to keep going, to focus, to study harder than ever before. I promised myself that one day, if I made it, I would find a way to give back. And here I am." The worker stared at him, words caught in his chest. He didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as someone who could inspire anyone. He had spent so much of his life just trying to stay afloat, barely getting by. To hear that his small act had sparked something so much larger, it felt overwhelming. "I've been looking for you," the man continued, his tone earnest. "I didn't know your name, but I remembered your face. Every time I passed that park, I hoped I'd see you. And today, I finally did." The worker lowered his eyes, staring at the cracks in the sidewalk. "I don't have much to show for myself," he admitted quietly. "Life's been hard. I'm still struggling." The man in the suit leaned closer, his voice steady but warm. "Then let me help you. You helped me when you had nothing. Now it's my turn." The worker's head snapped up, eyes wide. "Help me?" "Yes," the man said simply. "I owe you that. More than that, I want to. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I wouldn't be in this suit, walking out of that building. You gave me something that shaped who I am. Now let me give something back to you." The worker felt his chest tighten, not from hunger this time, but from the weight of the moment. For so long, he had believed his choices didn't matter, that his life was a series of struggles with no reward. And now, Here was proof that even in his darkest moment, his kindness had planted a seed that had grown into something he could never have imagined. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say yes," the man replied gently. "Let me help you. Let me carry forward what you gave me. It's not about repayment. It's about completing the circle." For the first time in years, the worker felt something stir inside him that he thought he had lost. Hope. Real, tangible hope. He saw it reflected in the eyes of the man beside him, the boy he had once fed, now grown, now successful, now offering to lift him up in return. The tables had turned, and in that turning, the worker realized something profound. Life had taken much from him, but it had also given him this moment, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, never vanished. It lived on, and sometimes it came back in the most unexpected and extraordinary ways. Tears welled in his eyes, though he tried to blink them back. For years, he had carried nothing but the weight of exhaustion and survival. Now, sitting on that bench beside the man in the suit, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He felt seen. The suited man placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and reassuring. "You don't have to keep struggling alone," he said. "You gave me more than food that night. You gave me a reason to believe. Let me do the same for you." The worker let out a shaky breath, his chest tight with emotion. He had always been proud of enduring, of surviving without asking for help, but pride had also kept him locked in hardship, pushing through every day with no relief. Now, for the first time, someone was reaching back to him, not with pity, but with genuine gratitude. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. "All right. Yes." A smile spread across the man's face, genuine and bright. "Good. We'll figure this out together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into the worker's calloused hand. "This is my number. Call me tomorrow. I want to introduce you to some people, maybe help you find a better job. And more than that, I want to stay in touch. You're part of my story. I won't forget that." The worker looked down at the card, the crisp lettering standing out against the dirt on his fingers. It felt unreal, like holding a ticket to a life he had never dared to imagine. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, side by side, the hum of the city around them. But in that silence, something powerful passed between them. Years ago, one had been starving and hopeless, the other barely surviving. Now they were here again, proof that kindness could travel farther than either of them had ever expected. Finally, the suited man stood, straightening his jacket. "I'll be waiting for your call," he said with a firm nod. "Don't disappear. Promise me that." "I promise," the worker replied, his voice steady this time. The man smiled once more, then walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The worker sat on the bench, the business card clutched tightly in his hand, his heart pounding with something he had not felt in years. Possibility. As the bus finally arrived and he stepped on, he found himself staring out the window, replaying the encounter over and over. The boy he had once fed had come back, not as a memory, but as living proof that no act of kindness was ever wasted. He thought about the hunger he had endured, the struggles, the endless days of hard labor. For so long, he had believed those years were meaningless, that they had left him with nothing. But tonight, he saw the truth. Every sacrifice, every hardship, every small act had led to this moment. The story had come full circle. He had given away his last meal once, thinking it was all he had to offer. Now, years later, that same act was offering him a new beginning. And as the bus rolled forward into the night, he allowed himself to smile, faint but real. Because sometimes, when you give without expecting anything in return, life finds a way to give back, often when you least expect it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.